Good morning and welcome. I'm Scott Thornburg. I'm based in San Francisco and lead global public relations for Sojern. For those of you that don't know, Sojern provides digital marketing solutions for the travel industry, powered by artificial intelligence and built on more than a decade spent analyzing the traveler intent data. Sojern activates multi-channel branding and performance marketing solutions to drive direct demand. More than 10,000 hotels, attractions, destinations, and travel marketers rely on Sojern to engage and convert travelers around the world. Today, we're going to be talking about managing guest expectations. These are unprecedented times. Before I get into that, I do want to introduce our speakers for today and actually have them introduce themselves. So let's start with Sine Scott from Accor.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, nice to be here, and thank you, Sojern. I'm Sheena from Accor, and I'm based in Vancouver, Canada. I work closely with our brands across North and Central America, Fairmont, Novotel, Ibis, Sofitel, and others. And essentially, I work with the properties to maximize their digital strategy and communications to their customers. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Chris, why don't you go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Blaine. I lead the Asia Pacific, Middle East, Africa, and Europe regions for Sojern. I'm based over here in London, so I am in London now. Been with Sojern for a little over 5 years, with the bulk of that time actually spent specifically on the property solutions side of our business, so really supporting hotels, individual hotels, small group, and up to chain hotel properties in driving more direct demand for their business. So it's nice to be here.
Thanks for being here, Chris. Jessica, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, Scott. My name is Jessica. I'm on the Insights team here at Sojern, based in the Bay Area, coming to you from Oakland, California. And what our team does is we strive to understand traveler behavior to help our clients meet the traveler where they are in their journey.
That's great. Thank you, Jessica. And welcome to all of our speakers. Excited to hear from you today. As Jessica mentioned, part of what Sojern does is we collect and analyze travel data, including flight and hotel booking data from thousands of partners around the world. This gives Sojern an unprecedented view into travel demand, and it's the basis of Sojern Insights that Jessica is going to talk to us about in a few minutes. Jessica is going to talk about ski destinations specifically and how things are moving. And then we're going to talk a little bit about managing guest expectations. Even the most well-traveled people don't know what to expect right now. With COVID regulations varying from location to location and continuing to change and evolve, the situation is fluid. As we think about where we are in the state of COVID, TSA this week just announced that they have crossed the 1 million passengers mark for the first time since April, which is huge. So excited to see travel coming back online. And Jessica, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit more about how travel is changing and what this really means for people that are trying to travel to ski destinations.
Sure thing, Scott. Thanks. So as Scott mentioned, I'm really excited to announce something new that the Insights team has been working on, which is destination focused on a specific interest. So everything we're going to cover today is kind of a special highlight on ski destinations. To start, just a broad overview of what we're seeing. Ski resorts, like everyone else during COVID, is having to adapt. By nature, skiing and snowboarding is probably among the less risky behaviors that somebody can do during COVID. It's already outdoors, socially distanced, at least while you're on the mountain. People already wear masks, eye protection, gloves. So the things that the resorts are going to be doing in the 2021 season are things like limiting access to the mountain, including reservations, limiting indoor access or how long you might be staying indoors, space seating, including on the lifts, contactless payments, so leave your cash at home, increased cleanliness across the resorts, including sanitizing the equipment rentals. And whereas mask wearing was a personal choice due to if you are cold-blooded like myself or tend on the warm side, it's a safety precaution now. So masks will be enforced, and eye protection, gloves, probably a good idea. Food preparation as much as possible outdoors with takeout. And then a shift this year, I think it's just going to be this season, away from this après ski. Away from the messaging of put your feet up next to a next to a fire with a beer, maybe during or after skiing. It's going to be more about the sport this year. So what does our volume look like in 2020 so far? These locations do have summer volume. So what we're looking at here are hotel bookings in ski destinations within North America. And how do we identify ski destinations? Well, we look and find hotels that are identified as near ski resorts, and then look wider to a 50-mile radius around those to pick up more of our hotels near these areas. And then we filter down. In North America, we're looking just at the places that have the largest ski resorts. And then in Europe, we look at places that are high elevation. And what we see for bookings in September and October is this may look like a lot of red, but it actually is really good compared to the general lodging market. We're comparing 2020 volume to 2019, and we see a lot of states actually have year-over-year growth, which is amazing. Canada does stand out a bit in the September and October. They did have a strong summer, which we'll see in the next slide, but have been declining since August. So if we look at the full year, and we're going to break down the regions in US into the 4 subregions and looking at Canada, we see that Canada in that yellow, you see that marked decline that I mentioned. And looking up, we see the northern regions in the blue, and then the southern US regions in the green. What's interesting to me is if you follow that same line and notice the most northern locations started declining soonest, and then the northern US states, and then southern US states, it's kind of this shift southern, and I'm guessing it has something to do with the temperature, people following more temperate climates. And this theory holds with the US behavior dipping somewhat in the shoulder season of August through October. When it's too cold to hike, but there's no snow, people tend to stay a bit away from those areas. The decline in Canada was a bit strong and did not follow seasonal behavior. So switching to more global view, and I also wanted to compare quickly against our general lodging vertical, so you get a sense for why that map that we showed first was actually really good news. In the vibrant colors on the left, you see that EMEA, Europe, and then North America have recovered greatly. You saw in the US, they actually went up as a whole, and we saw some regions did better than others, back up to January volumes, and then have kind of dipped following the seasonal trend that we saw in 2019. What's different about Europe, when we look at ski destinations specifically, is their decline dipped further in the lowest point. They did seem to hit their low point mid-April, very similar to when the US was. But because their ski locations are in places like Italy, France, Europe, they were all hit very hard during COVID early on. I think that's what drove the recovery to be slower. You see that they took more weeks to start their upward trend. What's interesting is they stopped about the week of June 21st, and it really started declining again, which is not seasonal like Canada, and seemed to be before the second waves of COVID and their announced opening for international travel. When we look to the more muted colors on the right, we'll see the general lodging vertical again for those regions. And what's worth noting is when you look at the ski destinations, they are doing stronger even with the declines, which we're noticing a decline stronger in ski destinations, and it's more flat in the general lodging vertical. So it's showing the shift of people away from some of these locations in the shoulder season. Now, one consideration, ski destinations, at least I've heard from clients in the US, is they're very dependent on long distance travelers. And you see that especially pertinent in the Northwest. It makes sense, there's large states. You know, you have to travel longer to get there. So the question is, are people going to still come? Because there's been an emphasis around drive markets being more important. People are staying closer to home, and we have seen that continue for ski destinations when we look for the bookings in September and October. And I saw this trend actually continue throughout the whole year. Just wanted to give more of a snapshot on this slide. So there is a notable drop, but you see it's more of a step change, and it's not half the volume or all the volume, which is good news. It shows that people are still willing to travel long distance to these destinations. But we do expect that there's going to be a decline this year. So drive markets will continue to be strategically important in the 2021 season. And the other thing interesting I noted when I looked at where people were coming from, how far people were coming from to these regions, and then Canada, is in all the regions except the Northwest, the extended drive market picked up. So the Northwest relied on the local market to cover the decline in the long distance market, but the others successfully took people from the 100 to 500 miles. And then our long distance travel is being defined as 500 miles or more, AKA the flight market. In terms of when people are booking, there's been a shift in ski destinations like what we're seeing in the general hotel market for shorter term planning. Now, if we look first to the bottom chart, 2020, we see that that increase in planning, that dark blue line jumping up around the COVID announcement in March, when the announcement came in the US. So people immediately shifted to long-term planning in the face of uncertainty. Oh, this will be over in a few months. Let me look for the end of the year kind of behavior. And then since then, it has tapered down, and the shift has been more in the short term, with a bump noticeably in the September-October time period, which seems to also be in the 2019 seasonal behavior when you notice. So now look at the two graphs and focus on the 50% line, and you can see that in 2019, more than half of people booked 1 week or more in advance. So the gray bar and everything below is 1 week or more, and you see it's consistently above 50%. Now, shifting to 2020, you've seen it kind of decline consistently throughout the year, showing people are more likely, they may be searching far in advance, and we are seeing indications of that. So it's still important to get in front of your customers. But in terms of when they're booking versus departing, they're making their plans, their formal plans with their credit cards, very close to when they travel. And finally, the big question is, will people come? So to give a snapshot on what we're seeing for the winter 2021 season, it looks good. So don't focus on the negative numbers as much. We should consider how the general industry is doing, and consider the ski destinations are still doing better. We notice especially in August, September, October. Let me backtrack and explain how we get to this graph for just a minute. So what we're looking at is in the last 90 days of of bookings, what month did those people say they would depart in? And we're comparing 90 days in 2020 versus 90 days in 2019. Now there is something going on that makes the numbers in August, September, and October look particularly good, and it's the booking window. The people that are booking in the last 90 days are more likely to depart very close to their booking, so that is what's causing the numbers to look really good for fall compared to 2019, who would book further in advance. And that's also what, when we shift to looking at our December, January, February, March timeframe, what's causing those numbers to be on the lower side compared to how people booked in the prior year. So I'm cautiously optimistic to say, you know, it's looking pretty good. The shorter lead times mean that winter bookings, I expect, will come in. So we're going to see those numbers kind of jump up and look a bit healthier as we get closer to the departure time. That is what I had to share with you for ski. And I know we have a big lineup coming after me, so I'm gonna pop off. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Very interesting to see how the ski destinations are evolving this year. So if you have questions about what Jessica presented, please put those in the chat and we can take those during Q&A. And next, we're going to go to Chris. Chris, tell us a little bit more about what we need to know about managing guest expectations during the ongoing pandemic.
I will indeed, Scott. Thank you so much. Before we get into the content, though, I'd love to start with a few poll questions for our attendees to get a sense for how you're feeling about things. So the first question I'd like to ask is, the pandemic has made it more challenging to keep my information up to date and set expectations properly. So is that true? Is it false, or are you unsure and don't know? The pandemic has made it more challenging to keep my information up to date and set expectations properly. Okay, so yes, not surprisingly, maybe a little bit of a leading question, but it certainly has been challenging, I know, for across the globe, certainly to keep information up to date. And something we'll talk a little bit about here moving ahead. So if we can go to the next question. So the next statement to respond to, I guess, is I currently find it hard to manage and keep updated the following channels. So you can select any and all that apply. I find it hard to manage and keep up-to-date information on OTA sites, on Google and search engines, on social websites, your own personal websites, or some other or none of those. So a couple seconds here to see the results. Okay, interesting, a bit of a mix. We'll talk about especially the OTA sites piece here in a little bit. That's definitely a critical one, as we all know that a majority of bookings tend to generate through OTA, so it's critically important to keep that information up to date. And certainly your website is an important one as well. And again, we'll dive into that in a bit here. And the last question is, what do you see as the biggest benefit for driving direct bookings? Is it for upselling, managing the relationship, loyalty programs, managing customer expectations is easier, or personalizing the customer experience? So just select one of those 5 options. What do you see as the biggest benefit for driving direct bookings? Okay, again, a bit of a mix across all the things. Personalizing the customer experience was the highest rated, next to managing the relationship. Yeah, very true. And I actually think a lot of these things work pretty well together. Not surprising, managing the relationship, expectations, and personalizing the experience all come down to the ability to control that conversation with your customer. So thank you for that information. All right, let's dive into the content here. So to kick off, I think it's really important for us to understand that there's lots of different things that are going on in the world and in your business that are setting expectations for customers. So if we dive into the first slide, the first thing we've mentioned several times throughout this presentation, and I'm sure you're hearing it and seeing in other data, is that travelers are definitely spending a lot more time researching, and they're doing it on longer windows. Now, as Jessica mentioned, we are seeing booking windows shrink, but the researching is certainly far more wide than we've seen historically, which is in pretty intense and amazing, because we have seen historically that customers tend to spend a lot of time researching things, but it's even more so now. And why is that? Well, there's a lot of things that are changing. Government regulations, guidelines, they're requiring shifts in your own protocols and how you manage and run your property. So those uncertainties are generating a lot more interest in trying to follow those changing things. Even seasoned loyal customers are having to do a lot of this. I travel quite a bit myself, and I'm spending a lot of my time just trying to understand where I can go, when I can go there. And then when I get there, sometimes is the property even open? And really understanding where I can be and where I can go and what I can do when I get there. And so this constant state of uncertainty is really adjusting the way that your guests are thinking about how they travel, where they're traveled to, and where they stay when they get to their destination. So two things I think are important to also understand about how guests form their expectations. The first one are what we would call brand expectations. And I think about this like what you say and how you say it. So when you think about something, the example we've listed here, like luxury spa, a luxury spa could mean a lot of different things to a potential guest. It could mean, it's a pool and a whirlpool. It could mean there's a nail salon facility on site. It could mean there's an actual massage facility on site. So making sure that you're understanding that as you use language and you highlight certain elements of your property, that the brand expectation may be different depending on the customer. So thinking through that, being more explicit in those things is really important. And then also on the product expectation side, a little bit more easy to control, more objective. And most hotels and most properties do this really well, giving very explicit and specific information about the product that customer is going to get. A king size bed with an ocean view, maybe it's a private museum tour, whatever it is, that expectation is much more clear and much more easily set. But I'd really lean towards the brand expectation side, especially given some of the uncertainties. The ability to be very explicit and specific when you're talking about the experience that they're going to have on your property is going to be critically important. So if we move forward, I think there's two different touch points that we want to talk about. The first one I'll touch on briefly, and then the second one with some more detail. The first one are offline touch points. And not surprisingly, then one of the #1 ways that offline touch points or expectations are created is through conversations with people close family, friends, members, whoever, and getting their word of mouth on how they've had an experience with a particular brand, and in this case, a particular property or hotel. And frankly, consumers place a lot of weight on word of mouth, and we've seen that across all different industries, especially as we look at all the key marketing trends. Word of mouth is usually the #1 driver and decision maker. But where it also becomes important, especially when setting guest expectations, is in the experience that they have, because what we found is that expectations come from a set of experiences over time, right? So how you handle that on-site experience with a guest will ultimately form a future expectation for what that experience will look like for them, or what that experience could look like as a guest looks at other opportunities or other options. So they may have a terrific experience in one place, so an expectation set is very high, and if your property doesn't deliver on that when they arrive at your property, that could be a challenge in terms of creating that positive word of mouth going forward. So it's really critical and important to understand that the on-site experience from a guest will help set and drive future expectations and also feed that strong word of mouth moving forward. And then the last thing I would call out here is just customer service. Response times, getting back to guests as quickly as possible. I think this is really important because, again, as you think about uncertainty and just you as a consumer yourself, when you're uncertain, you don't like to have to wait because that uncertainty continues to build. So great responsiveness, getting back to customers quickly when they're on site, on your presence, they have a question, immediately responding and servicing those needs. Again, a critical, important way for us to drive a positive expectation moving ahead. The second area I'd like to cover off on is online touch points. So there's 5 major drivers we believe for setting expectation online. The first one is your website. And we saw in the poll results, the website is a critical component to not only capturing guests and capturing guests directly so that you can control that conversation, but it's also critical because it is your storefront. One of the things that we have found in our data over time, even if a customer decides to ultimately book through a online travel agent, through Booking, through any other OTA, they are almost all the time going to that property website before they choose to purchase. So controlling that conversation with the guest is critically important when they hit your website. So a couple of things to think about. The first thing is making sure that you're working with data providers. We provide data, as you've seen from Jessica, but other data providers to really understand what are the behaviors and trends in your area so that you can make sure that your website's ready to catch that demand as it comes. Not only is it important to catch that immediate demand as it comes in, but also with the advanced booking window that you usually we find historically that booking through direct websites actually have longer booking windows than bookings through OTAs. Not surprising data, that has historically been true. All booking windows are shrunk now in COVID, but ultimately over time, website booking windows tend to be a lot longer. You can now control that conversation with the client, advance activities in terms of upsell, cross-sell, again, setting those expectations with guests, really important. Obviously, we talked about upsell and certainly the idea of creating loyalty. And you'll see here at the bottom of each of our slides, we have a fun little tip that we've added here at the bottom. I won't read it out for all of you, but as you see my slides pop up, take a look at some of the tips that we're providing there. But your website's critical. It is your storefront. It is what people will think and understand about your brand and what you have to offer and have the most lasting and impactful impression as it relates to selling your brand, selling your service, selling your experience to clients. The second one that I think we need to look at is how you are present across the search engines. Specifically here, we're talking about Google and making sure certainly your Google business profile is up to date so you can be found on relevant searches either through Google search or through map search. But I also think it's important because oftentimes customers are using search in the beginning of their activity. So they may be looking for hotels in a certain destination, right? And they're starting to look at various options there. Search engines generally have a full funnel component to them. And so understanding that you've got to be able to manage that expectation in that channel critically, because the majority of users are going to search at some time during their booking process and their search process. The other thing I think it's also important to understand is when you think about search generally, it's not just the ability to get up in the rankings either through SEO activities or through even paid search activities, but it's also the message that you send. Don't forget, search is a great way to send a marketing message. So really thinking about how do I use that message in search today, given some of the uncertainty that exists, to make sure that I'm creating that opportunity to put these potential guests at ease or to deliver a message that gives them confidence in clicking through and spending more time with my brand. So the third area that we talk about, we saw it earlier in the importance of OTAs in the survey question. We have to make sure always that we are creating a presence within the OTAs that mirrors our brand and mirrors the message that we want to send. That oftentimes, as we know, is challenging in the what I like to call the frenemy relationship between OTAs and hoteliers, but it is critically important to ensure that you are getting the right messages out there, spending certainly time with your OTA representatives, ensure that you have the ability and the flexibility to adjust those messaging as needed, thinking about your images, keeping them up to date, keeping them fresh, addressing how those images might need to change with the changing in sort of certain requirements or regulations, et cetera. So those are critically important. And as we know, OTAs tend to drive a great majority of the distribution and the bookings for hotels. So a super important one to stay on top of. The fourth one is social media. What's interesting about social media is that if you can engage with an individual who uses social media as a means for staying up to date on things, as an interaction tool, as many do, what we often find is that those more active social media posters are 3 times more likely to provide a review for a property than those that don't. And so really engaging individuals on in a conversation on social media is also not just important in terms of having that relationship with them, but also helping to influence them to deliver on positive reviews for you moving forward as well. So social media is super important. It is billions upon billions of users, as we know, across the social ecosystem. And so that's going to be a really important part of your overarching strategy in helping to ensure that you are delivering the messages you need to deliver to set those expectations properly. And finally, let's talk a little bit about how you need to think about review sites. So one of the things I will just mention, this is not necessarily a service that we provide here at Sojern, but there are some very strong online reputation management solution providers out there. And I'd really strongly encourage hoteliers to really think about how that might fit into your strategy, into your digital strategy. It's really, really important to manage this. As you see some of the data here, 72% of travelers always or frequently read reviews before deciding where to stay or what activities to do. 78% of travelers focus on the most recent reviews in their search. They're looking at the top of the list to see what former customers are saying. And then finally, 55% of travelers read multiple reviews across several pages to get a sense of overall opinion. So over half of the people that are reading reviews are getting deep into those reviews. So having a review management strategy is critically important to ensuring that you're setting the right tone with your potential guests and you're ensuring that the right messages are getting out there. Now, we'll talk here in a second, I think probably in some of the Q&A about how do you do that effectively, how do you manage that reputation, and how do you think about reviews. And I know Sheena is going to have some great insights to share from her experience at Accor. But one of the things that I would say is that as a frequent traveler myself, not somebody who works in a hotel and has to manage this myself, I would say that the review process for me is the #1 determination of where I ultimately go, especially on a leisure trip. Maybe more so important for me on a leisure trip than on a business trip. And I like to read the best reviews. I like to read the 5-star reviews, and I always go down to, no matter how many there are, the lowest possible reviews. So I can get a sense for, is it something specific to the property that people are excited about or don't like? Or is it something specific to maybe their personal experience? And I think that's really important to understand, because when you think about how reviews work and how they work successfully, it's not just about the individual's experience that we as guests want to think about. It's about the cumulative set of experiences that people have. Is there a theme there? And is it just an emotional response because they didn't get the room service that they wanted? Or is it more something that's more sort of inherent through all of the comments that I'm seeing that either gives me confidence or frankly doesn't give me confidence that that's the right property for me? So I think that's it, with the exception of one final piece, which is knowing your customers. So we mentioned social media. It is critically important to ensure that you monitor social media. You've got to stay on top of your own pages, Facebook pages, etc., and making sure that you're staying in touch with what customers are saying and what customers or how customers are trying to engage with you on that. It's a great way to have a two-way conversation. So really stay on top of that. The second thing is a customer relationship management program. Not only is that important for marketing activities and trying to create loyalty and drive return guests, et cetera, but it's also a way for us to ensure that we understand what the guests want and need and how we keep that top of mind. So if and when they do come back to us, we can create a really interesting and bespoke experience for them that makes them feel like that experience is going to be outstanding. And as I mentioned earlier, expectations get set through experiences. So the more positive experiences we create, the better those expectations become and the more likely guests are to return. I always think it's important to make sure we're getting the pulse of customers and the pulse of guests. So ensuring that you're contacting them, asking them questions, requesting feedback, whether they're posting it on review sites or not. How can you get more feedback to continuously improve your product? Also important. And then finally, as you saw in Jessica's presentation, there's lots of great data sources out there. We at Sojern certainly have those available. We have them available on our website, but there are lots of ways that you can gather data through other technology partners that you work with as well, and staying on top of that data and those trends, so you can make sure that you're navigating the changing behaviors from guests, and making sure you're keeping your messaging up to date with that. So with all that, I think I'll turn it back over to Scott, and we will kick off our Q&A with Sheena.
Sounds great. Thanks, Chris. And before we do that, I did want to mention on the slide here, I'm also going to drop this into the chat. Sojern just published an ebook about managing customer expectations. So if you want a deeper dive into this and really want to dive into some of what we have, there is the link, and you're welcome to check that out in your own time. So let's go into questions, and we did have several questions that were submitted in advance as part of registration, so we're going to start with those, and then if we have time, we'll get to any live questions. So kicking us off, Chris, let's start with exactly what you just mentioned, reviews. Do you have any recommendations on how to best handle responding to negative reviews? And Chris or Sheena, either one of you could really start with this.
Yeah, I'm going to let Sheena do most of the talking on this stuff because she's got some very strong direct experience. But the one thing I would say is very quickly.
Well,
very quickly.
Generally, the majority of our reviews, on a positive note, are good reviews. So certainly, you want to be responding to all of them, and most importantly, those negative reviews, taking them through the online to offline. Of course, we know on property that resources are very limited right now. So GMs, DOSMs are strapped, DRMs, but as an executive committee, if you can sit down and assign, either split up the work, split up the review sites, ensure that you're taking a look at those reviews and responding, first of all, online, doing it in a way that's not necessarily just generic, but referencing that issue, taking it into consideration, and then further to that, building a feedback loop, sitting down with operations teams to investigate that issue. If it's something that comes up, for example, in housekeeping or what have you, really taking the time to go through that and address it and use it as a learning experience to improve. We're all learning right now. Things are such a different reality. So these reviews can be gold in improving overall service, overall health and safety. We are noticing increasing traffic from TripAdvisor. So I think guests are even looking at those review sites a little bit more than they did in the past. And don't forget that Google reviews are also growing as well as social media. So a lot to keep in mind, but ever so important today.
Absolutely. Sheena, what have you seen to be the biggest disconnect between customer expectations and the current offerings at Accor properties?
Yes, there's more questions than ever from guests, more calls to the call center, to the property directly. We've been doing our very best at Accor to educate our guests in as many digital touch points as possible with detailed information on our all safe health protocols, on the property amenities and services that are open, what they can expect, whether or not they need to make reservations for restaurants, pools, so they can really plan in advance. So for the most part, our guests are quite understanding and do take the time to read that. We have our pre-arrival emails, many touch points, as I mentioned. But what I have heard from our GMs and on property is that guests want to take a vacation from COVID. So they come to the hotel and they may think that the protocols that are in place in their community, such as masks or obviously social distancing, may not apply to them when they're on vacation. But we have lots of signage. Our colleagues, we call them our artists, are there to help guests understand that we do have some of those protocols in place, really for their health and safety.
And I think we could all use that mental health break that we would normally get from a vacation, right? So I know that's something that it's top of mind for a lot of people right now. Do you notice any differences between property types or locations and whether or not the customer expectations are being met?
Well, certainly different customer sets, whether it be our eco properties versus our luxury, have different expectations, but we're really trying at Accor to make sure that all of our properties are at a level. So 95% of our properties have gone through some rigorous training on our all safe health and safety protocols. So I would have to say that our properties are very consistent. Of course, with more amenities come more demands. So if a property has a resort where they have multiple pools, where they have wellness, spa, many restaurants, guests have very high expectations. Indeed, certainly guests that are in the luxe properties may expect services like turn down. They can be more critical of some reduced housekeeping visits that we have installed, just really with the health and safety of our colleagues and our guests in mind. So, so I think that, you know, with more services and amenities, the expectations can be higher, certainly.
I've definitely seen that, by the way, as well, just from a personal perspective. I've been able to do a little bit of traveling, just given the nature of my role here in the region. And, you know, I've certainly noticed that as well, Sheena, in terms of different types of properties that I've been able to visit. All of them have a very strong standard that they've set. And I happen to be an Accor loyalty member, so I have stayed at some Accor properties, and they all have a very high standard that they're meeting. And you're right. I think when I've walked into a property that is you know, more on the luxury side of things, my expectations actually are a little different when I walk in the door. And frankly, I've actually been pleased with the consistency. In that, you know, because we're all living in these uncertain times, and all of our expectations are definitely just a little different, if not a lot different, from where they were back the same time last year. And I think it's been remarkable to watch, not just at some of the Accor properties I've visited, but others as well, the consistency in how the teams there have handled their guests, regardless of budget, regardless of luxury. And that consistency gives me confidence that I'm not, you know, I'm not losing something by going to one type of property versus another type of property. So that's really been interesting to watch, and definitely to see the teams, as you mentioned, sort of being consistent in that execution.
I think that what comes through is that our artists love what they do, and making that connection with a guest is going to flow through. So whether or not they're wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, the smile comes through, and the genuine service and the genuine caring.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about data. Chris, you brought this up a lot, and obviously Sojern works with a lot of data, so I'd love for you to start with this. But can you give us an example about how using data can help us set clearer or better expectations for our customers?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about the CRM and the importance of the CRM in helping to design or define the customer experience. You know, and when you have a really effective CRM and you can leverage the data you have in that CRM to understand the historical behaviors of a particular type of guest, it gives you the ability to deliver a much better and real experience for that guest when they arrive at the property. You know something about them. You're able to create an experience for them that is comfortable, and they feel comfortable and safe in that experience. And so certainly number one would be the ability to use the data you have yourselves to create a really strong and meaningful experience and safe and comfortable experience for guests. That's number one. The second one, you know, I would say is that, you know, you've got a lot of data that you can gather that is maybe less quantitative but more qualitative. And we talked a lot about the ability to monitor the conversations that are going on about your property, whether those be review sites or whether those be through social networks, and how people are talking about things. There's data there to use to understand the things that you either may need to change or adjust as more and more guests come in, so you can either change the perspective of your property through the views that you're seeing, or to have that conversation with a guest and understanding what you're hearing through that conversation, how that changes the way you deliver on the experience when somebody arrives on site. And it's not, doesn't need to be necessarily one for one. What you learn from a group of customers is likely going to be true for many of your guests, if not all of them. So those data points become really, really important to be able to deliver on that experience for all the guests as they come in. So those would be two areas that I would recommend spending some time with.
Yeah.
Certainly no shortage of data, that's for sure. And you mentioned some of the review curation sites. Sorting through that by category can be very useful as well to try to find out if there's some pain points, if perhaps something that you didn't consider as a pain point in dining, you can drill down on that on property and solve the issue. And then conversely, if something's really shining through as resonating with guests, either on social or through your reviews, kind of going further with that. We did that a little bit with some of our promotions. This summer, we had a complimentary bike service with a picnic that you could purchase to take on the bike. And in the past, we tried to market this, it never really took off. But in this day and age, it really took off. So we further promoted that to our all Accor members and used the data. The data really helped us to understand that.
Yeah, actually, and Sheena, you just actually triggered another thought for me as well. In the commentary on using the data from the review sites and some of these tools that are available to you to sort and categorize things, your website. So you can watch a lot of what's going on and what people care about and think about your property just by watching your website analytics and where they're spending time, what pages they're bouncing from. But there's a lot of really valuable data in what, again, I call your store, right? To a client, they're walking into your store, to your website, and they're going to browse in certain places. And are they spending more time at the shoes or at the blouses? And where are they spending that time? And then how does that help me understand what they care about? So then I can use that information to improve going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Sheena, what would you say is the #1 pain point for your general managers when thinking about managing customer expectations?
Oh dear, well, there's a lot on our general manager's plates, of course, wearing multiple hats, the stress of managing owner expectations, operational costs, health and wellness of our guests. So my heart goes out to them. It's just such a challenging time. And then of course, driving business with fewer resources. So I don't know if I can come up with one pain point. There's lots of challenges, but I think everybody's doing an extraordinary job. One thing that I have heard a lot when we've communicated is just the teams and the team members having to wear so many multiple hats. So we've obviously had to have fewer colleagues with lower business levels, but having to deliver higher standards. So all the safety protocols, procedures puts a lot of strain and a lot of new things to grapple with on property. So I think that really the health and safety and wellness of our colleagues and our guests is probably the #1 challenge.
Yeah, everyone's wearing multiple hats and wearing a mask. They've got a whole new wardrobe and trying to manage it all. It's definitely a crazy thing.
Yeah, and we just have to be adaptable too, right? And they have families as well. I've been on calls where 4-year-olds hopping on and a general manager is trying to juggle many things, but they're doing it with finesse.
Yeah. I think we all deserve a little patience right now. Everyone deserves a little patience. So, well, going back to an earlier comment, we were talking a little bit about reviews and managing negative reviews, but we know that reviews are important. How do you recommend that brands get more reviews from customers, but without pushing them aggressively to do so? Sheena, do you want to start? And then maybe Chris, you would have some thoughts as well.
Sure. Well, there's sort of the technical aspect of it, ensuring that you have a feedback loop in your post-arrival communications. But I think that at the heart of it is really delivering above and beyond experiences. So guests will feel compelled to write that 5-star review. Of course, volume is important with the reviews, but you want those standout stories. Back to Chris's point, He looks to read the very, very top reviews and obviously the negative reviews too, but delivering those exceptional experiences that are a little bit above and beyond, I think is what's the most important thing there.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, again, I always come out of this as not somebody who is a hotelier from the guest perspective, and from the guest perspective, I'm very much more willing to invest my own time in supporting a brand that has treated me in a way that was special and meaningful. The risk and the challenge is you tend to get both. Tend to get both sides. I'm either willing to say something if it was outstanding, or I'm willing to say something if it really was not outstanding. And so that's an important thing just to always remember. So I totally agree with Gina. I actually think personally, you have a right and an obligation to be able to ask your guests for a review. And sometimes it just takes asking and making it easy for them to do that, whether it's a way that you, in the checkout experience, how you handle that there. You know, there's ways that I've heard hoteliers are doing it in terms of, you know, some sort of incentive to do so. You know, maybe it's a free bottle of wine on your next stay, whatever it might be. So I know we sort of used the word there, Scott, aggressively. Certainly there is a balance between, you know, an appropriate encouragement for a review and you know, so being a little bit more aggressive in a way that makes the customer experience not terrific, and you get the opposite outcome. But I do think it's appropriate to ask, and if you've treated the customer great and you've delivered a wonderful experience, you have the right to ask for that review. So I wouldn't be shy about asking for it. I think we as guests certainly you know, always appreciate it when we are treated well, and certainly do care about the properties that we stay in. And so you know, when you're treated well and you're asked for something, oftentimes people are willing to participate.
That's great, thank you. And let's shift gears a little bit and talk about direct bookings. Has the importance of direct bookings and a strong customer relationship grown during the pandemic? Chris, why don't you start with this?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. You know, I mentioned this earlier in the presentation. I'm kind of tired of the expression now more than ever, but I'll use it. It is now more than ever important to control the conversation with your customers and with your guests. As we talked about, the changing landscape of regulations, the guidelines that will have to be put in place. There may be certain requirements when you arrive at a property that you need to be aware of. You know, and certainly some of those things are possible through other booking channels, obviously, but your ability to control the conversation with your guests through that direct booking and that direct relationship, I think, is critically important, again, now more than ever. And so, and we've definitely seen, you know, certainly from our side of the business, you know, our whole job is to help drive direct bookings for clients. That's what we try to do, is get customers to visit your site and spend time and book on your site. You know, we've definitely found more and more hoteliers understanding the need to be able to shift that demand away from what might have been a more historically rich OTA distribution mix into more of a direct distribution mix, just because, you know, they have to be able to say to a client, I'm sorry, we can't provide this or that. Or I even had an experience where I booked with a hotel and they hadn't had their booking engine updated, and so I didn't realize the property was closed. So I actually immediately got a call and note from the hotel explaining that to me. But that direct relationship was allowed. If I'd done that through an OTA, I might not have ever known that. There may have been some other problem that could have existed just due to the distribution, potential distribution challenge. So yeah, I think it's now more than ever important to really consider your direct booking strategy and ensure you're investing and leaning into shifting that mix so you can have that conversation.
Yeah, Gina, what do you think about this? How important are direct bookings, and has that importance grown?
Well, being part of the e-commerce team, it's critically important. One thing that we really worked on, particularly during the early days when guests were in lockdown, was generating that relationship. So not only just pushing our direct offers, but really engaging with our customers and using our databases and our social media to engage with them. So we built up a very interesting all at home content schedule. And we worked closely with our properties, our chefs, our GMs, our wellness coordinators to build out some really interesting and engaging content that we could share with our guests to keep them thinking about our brands, even though when they weren't necessarily direct booking with our brands, and entertain them and engage them so that we were certainly top of mind. We had even hula lessons, just such fun content to engage with customers and build that direct relationship.
That's great. As we think about in our last few minutes here, what do you think we can do to prepare for changing expectations as the situation develops? You know, there are different locations are opening in different times, regulations are changing. How do we prepare for that?
I think some of the data that actually Sojern's been providing has been incredibly helpful. What Jessica shared today for me with some of our properties in ski locations was incredibly useful to think about that short-term demand, to look at the data, to be nimble and shift offers. So, you know, we had some wonderful pickup in the summer. We were able to, you know, keep demand going, but then after with leisure markets, after Labor Day, things did slow down. So we had to take a little bit of shift in our marketing and think about how we could maybe, while we don't try to discount too much, bring in a little bit more of an aggressive pricing model, also shift as markets constrict, as they close. We've been pushing more hyper local offerings where people can go in their backyard and celebrate with festive Halloween on property, Thanksgiving. So really using that data, but just being very nimble. You might have one strategy and think it's going to go through, and then a market will close down, and you'll have to really rethink everything.
Yeah, one of the other areas that we talked about earlier, and Sheena had mentioned it, you know, at Accor, and I'm guessing, you know, for some of the people that may be on the webinar that aren't necessarily part of a group that have their own independent property, resources are really challenged right now. So, and I think we all get that. One of the things that I'd really encourage everybody to think about is, how can you use technology to make your life easier? And how do you then deploy your resources against the most critical elements of your business, which is delivering on an outstanding customer experience? And so you set those positive expectations moving forward, as we talked about earlier. So there are so many technology providers out there right now that you can take advantage of to help you with things that you might not have the staff to do yourself. So, you know, we talked about online reputation management yet again, because it's an important and really critical component to expectation setting. Those tools are out there and they're available for you. They're not hard to find. Type them into Google and you will see several. Talk to your booking engine provider. There's lots of ways for you to ensure that you're staying on top of some of these technology trends. And again, with these changing dynamics in the world today, the ability to stay on top of that, not just in terms of the data that you're looking at, which I think is also critical and important to do, but also being able to be nimble, the word that Sheena used, in the way you're adjusting that marketing strategy and that communication with guests is going to be critically important. So you need your resources there, not trying to figure out, like, what's the way I can get to respond to all these reviews. You just won't be able to do that with the resources you have. So getting technology to help you, I think, is really important.
Right, that's great. In our last 2 minutes here, we'll have quick answers, but would love to hear your thoughts on social media and the role of social media, the types of messages we should be posting, what should we be saying on social media. Sheena, why don't you start with this?
Well, again, a good mix. First of all, making sure you're taking a look and responding to the customers. So I think first and foremost, listening. Don't let those comments go to the wayside. And then building a really nice, engaging content schedule. Certainly, you want to have some offers there, but making it interesting, fresh. Talking to your customers about really interesting local content is what I would recommend.
Yeah, I completely agree with Sheena. And actually, we had a webinar not too long ago where we were talking about a similar strategy, and the other hotelier on the call had the same exact feedback, which is, you know, be on top of it, have a conversation, keep the content fresh. make sure you're delivering sort of experiential messaging that make people want to engage with you more.
That's great. Well, thank you both so much. This was a fantastic conversation. Sheena, we really appreciate your time with us today.
Yes, thank you, Sheena.
Thanks so much. And I think that is all the time we have. So thanks so much to all of our attendees for joining us today. We hope to see you on our next call as well. Have a good day.
Thanks so much,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.